voters in Georgia have turned out in record numbers as the battleground state opened for early voting in the presidential election. At least 252,000 voters have cast ballots at early voting sites, nearly double in the first day of early voting seen in the 2020 election. Early voting, either in person or by mail, has become increasingly popular with U.S. voters. Reaction from Trump on the early voting: he said the votes are coming in at a nice level for his Republican Party. Now, another big story out of Georgia: a judge has temporarily halted a new rule that would have required poll workers to hand count ballots in the upcoming November 5th election. The decision is a setback for Donald Trump and his allies, who pushed for the rule following Trump's 2020 defeat in the state. Democrats argued the change could cause confusion and delay results.
The Republican camp has suffered a double whammy in the crucial swing state of Georgia. The state's Superior Court judge, Robert McBurney, has blocked a recently passed rule that required hand counting of ballots on election night. Interestingly, the setback came hours after the same judge delivered another body blow, mandating that local election officials must certify results in the swing state. Refuting the Georgia Election Board's attorney argument that hand count would only take a few extra minutes rather than hours to complete, the recent head count rule was termed as being too much, too late. And not to anyone's surprise, the Blue Camp has welcomed the ruling. The contentious new rule was passed as recently as September 20th by the pro-Trump conservative majority of Georgia's election board, due to be implemented late October. It directed every county to have 3 poll workers count the paper ballots, but not votes, on election night after the polls close and before a machine count. Speaking of mandating local election officials to certify results, Justice McBurney opined that voters would be silenced if officials refused to certify election results. The ruling cuts at the heart of a key argument made by right-wing activists since the 2020 election, when Donald Trump allegedly sought to disrupt the certification process as part of his alleged bid to subvert the results. He still faces criminal charges accusing him of pressuring Georgia officials to reverse his 2020 election loss, though he denies any wrongdoing. Trump has pleaded not guilty. Early voting began in record numbers in the crucial swing state on Tuesday. Along with the other 6 swing states, Georgia is expected to determine who ends up winning the race to the White House. Arjun Samar Mahindran for NDTV World.
Let's get you more on the story. We are joined by Sonjoy Kumar. She is with a group called South Asians for Harris. Also, Amy Tarkanian. She is a Republican strategist. She is also former Nevada Republican state chairwoman. Amy, let me come to you first. How much of a blow is this for Republicans? Do you agree with Judge Robert McBurney that this whole idea about it being too much to be implemented so close to election day, that's also what people on the ground have been saying?
Sure. Well, I actually agree with this ruling because poll workers, they're volunteers, and they do take time out of their busy schedules to learn the rules that are going to be implemented in the current election system. So if they want to make those changes, then like you do in Nevada, you would have to have it go through your state legislature, and then they can be implemented in the following election. So this truly was a last minute scenario that would delay the election process and in the certification. Is it a good idea? Sure, because I'm sure it'll calm a number of folks who do believe that there are problems in the election system and still truly believe that the last election was stolen, which I disagree with, but there are people who have problems with it. So if it calms people down, great, but you're going to have to go through the legal process and make sure it's done timely.
As a Republican strategist, though, how do you think this would play out? Do you think this is really bad for the Trump camp?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily bad because I think the elections are fair and balanced. And so I think they're still going to have the correct outcome despite having this hand count or not. And, this hand count was simply just to make sure that it was the number of votes cast that aligned with what the machines showed at the end. It wasn't going to show how many votes were cast for Trump, how many votes were cast for Harris. And so, it is timely. It's
Yeah.
something that does take up some time. And so I think in the end, they're still going to have the right outcome.
Okay, Sanjay, you have Republican strategists there agreeing with what the judge ruled. Now, Democrats have been against this whole idea of hand counting, saying it could lead to fraud. But important, as Amy just mentioned, that the election officials were merely counting the number of ballots to match those tallied by the machine. They weren't really reading the ballots to see, how people voted, as we heard from Amy just now. So what's the issue? It's in my view, or in many other people's view perhaps, is that it's just reassuring voters that the machine got it right.
So the rule itself is not what was being challenged. It was the timing of it and the reason behind it, and the fact that it was being implemented just literally days before the election date and actually after early voting has begun. And I empathize with Amy because she is part of a party that is still trying to balance Trump versus rationality. I mean, everyone knows the election wasn't stolen. They know President Biden won. But a lot of these rules that are being pushed by the state election board, which there's still 3 or 4 more out there that are being challenged based on rationality and reasonable basis. And that is the basis on which the judge ruled against the rule going into effect. It's not the fact of the rule, it's how it's being pushed down the throats of 7,500 poll workers who are already trained and county election boards that already have their processes in place. That's the problem. He will look at the rule in a reasonable manner, not based on some last minute, trying to, instill chaos, as I said last week, into the Georgia election process.
Yeah. You did mention that when we had you on Friday. Now, Amy, the judge also made reference to January 6th, the attack on the U.S. Capitol. He said that those memories haven't faded away. Just on Tuesday, Trump was in Georgia telling his supporters to deliver a victory that's, quote, too big to rig. Clearly a reference to his misinformation that the 2020 election was stolen. Do you worry about a repeat of the same scenario this time around in 2024?
I do to some degree, and you use the word misinformation when this is clearly disinformation. Misinformation is accidental, disinformation is intentional. And he knows that over and over and over again in the court of law, it was turned down and he lost in every case to show that there was systemic fraud, and it just wasn't that wasn't the case. And so he continues to push and peddle that message, and it trickles down to his followers that believe every word that he says, unfortunately, which leads to chaos, confusion. People don't trust the voting and election process, which I think is very dangerous. And he sets himself up for a possible failure, but still to be viewed as the winner, in the outcome, no matter what. And I think that's actually very dangerous. And I think that it actually hurts the Republican Party overall, because the down ticket, we actually have some really excellent candidates, and they're having to, as your panelists mentioned, walk a fine line between reality and irrationality, and wanting to make sure that they're trying to get their message out to their constituents on how they're going to better their lives while still having to walk this tightrope with a man who's pushing disinformation.
All right, Sanjay, you're a lawyer. What happens next with this case, do you think? An appeal? Where can this go? Any chance of the rule coming back into play and we end up actually seeing hand counting of ballots in Georgia after all?
Yeah, I think, I'm not involved in the legal process, but it can be appealed in Georgia.
Sure.
A case goes from Fulton County Superior Court, would then go to the appellate court, and then ultimately the Supreme Court of Georgia. It could also, I guess, somebody could try to move it to federal court. There's different strategies. We really hope this is the end of it. We are very close to election day, as you already covered in the news. 328,000 something Georgians have already voted. This is, the first day of voting yesterday. This is not the time to start messing with the rules of the election or the counting process. It can be dealt with after the elections, and if it's a reasonable rule, it can go into effect. I want to mention that the Republican Secretary of State and Attorney General oppose this rule. It's just a handful of Trump supporters on the state election board that are pushing it. So we hope that it doesn't get
Sure.
appealed, but of course it could be appealed. And there are still a few more days till the election, so anything can happen.
Sanjay and Amy, thank you so much for your time here on US Election Watch.